Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tom Munns, and I'm with Ron Nielsen today. He's a good friend of mine. I think we've been friends for a long time. We began in education circles. I think when I first got involved, right around 2005 or six or something like that, and it's really amazing to be able to touch base with him again to find out what he's been doing since then. And part of this video is to be able to help you understand that as well, and to be able to help you understand that you're really going to want to hear this. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to be planning on going through and doing a series of videos to be able to help bring people up to speed on the research that Ron's done. Uh, I should probably say that Ron has spent the last 18 years of his life. I think it's probably longer, but he has written this book here called The History of Federal Lands in the United States and the Violence of Faction. Um, it is a very interesting read. It's definitely not an elementary read, but it is worthwhile for any American that is concerned about their country to be able to understand the gravity of the situation that we face. Most of us are focused on single issues, whatever the issue is. We all seem to be fearful of these agencies that are running rogue, and they're doing all kinds of things and creating their own laws, and dealing with whether they had delegated authorities and powers and things or whether they didn't. Um, and we all just assumed that the administrative state was the area that we should be pointing our finger. However, most of us, we look at the issue for what the issue is, and we don't look at the history of the issue, which is why I'm really glad to have Ron on and glad that he's on with me to be able to discuss what that is. And this is an introductory video. We're going to try to keep this short, probably around a half hour if we can. But we're going to give you a brief overview of who he is, what led him on this journey, and ultimately what the book is about. And then, if all goes well, we will launch into going through each section and each chapter a video at a time. So we have a video chronology of the book for people that are less inclined to be able to read substantive material. So, Ron, thanks for joining me today, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Tom. It's good to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I think I first met you at a meeting. I saw you wearing your leather tattered hat, and I'll never forget this. And then you spoke one day, and I look back and I'm like, who's this scruffy dude? And how can he be so eloquent? And for you were one of the greatest examples I have ever had that you better not judge somebody by the way they look. And so, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean, you would expect that the things that come out of your mouth would be something that we're programmed to believe that only somebody that had a suit or a tie or short hair or all of that. So you're destroying all of those narratives, and brilliantly so. And I'm just grateful to be your friend, and the fact that you've actually shared the work with me. So what I'd first like to begin with is where you began, that kind of led up to the creation of this book.
Well, as you well know, back it was 2009 or so, I started kind of a watchdog group in Boise. That's where you and I met. I think you and I met at a GOP meeting,
Yeah,
right?
a
And
pachyderm
I was
meeting.
sitting in the back. Yeah, pachyderms. And I still remember that day. All these eyes turned toward me when I got up to say a few things. Everybody was like, "What the heck?" It was one of those odd moments. But anyways, yeah, so that the name of the group was Sons of the Republic, and we that are the whole idea of Sons of the Republic sort of was built out of what happened with the 2008 crisis, right? 2008, 2009, and at work, a lot of my coworkers lost pretty much all their carpenter pensions and this sort of thing, and there were some that were saved from it. I lost about 50% of mine. And we're all sitting around talking to one another, trying to figure out how the heck this happened. And obviously there was something going on that we didn't understand. Well, about this time, I had been approached by mutual acquaintance of ours, Edmondson. Uh, Mr. Edmondson.
Hmm.
And we started thinking about creating a group to do watchdog stuff and try to investigate some of these matters. And of course, James Anthony started becoming a friend of ours, and we started dealing with him a little bit more. And he's just a brilliant constitutional scholar,
The code
absolutely
breaker.
brilliant. Yeah, this guy was on another level,
Yeah,
right?
he was.
So that was the thing that I noticed right away with MJ. We all called him MJ affectionately. Was that his ability to parse Supreme Court precedent and put it into this proper constitutional lawful legal context, right? Meaning, what I mean by that is how you would utilize the precedent and the case law in a federal court situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting a lot of tutorial from him. Of course, we were doing our normal government oversight type things. And one day he called a meeting, and so we met down on the Capitol Street in Boise at a restaurant, and he had this constitutional encyclopedia, and he had it open to Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, and he slides it over to me and he says, "Will you please read that?" So of course, it's MJ, so I read it. And when I was done reading it, he asked me, "Well, do you understand what it's saying there?" I'm like, "I have no stinking idea what the hell this is saying, but it doesn't sound right." But it was about the constitutional interpretation of Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 from the eyes of the people who wrote the Constitutional Encyclopedia, using case law
Mm-hmm.
to bolster that interpretation. But it wasn't, it was an interpretation unlike any I had heard to date, right? So there's two camps, from what I can say, on the federal land issue. You have the I hate to say it, but the Ammon Bundy issue, that group, where they kind of take a sagebrush rebellion approach to the federal land issue. And then there's the way that the federal courts have been dealing with it for the better part of 235 plus years. So I'm reading the way that the federal courts have interpreted this, and it doesn't jive with everything I've heard, right? So right away, I knew that there was, this disparity between the two positions needed to be fleshed out. And he asked me, he said, "Will you please look into this?" And that's what started my investigation into the federal land matter.
Well, we were looking into, at that time with the Sons of the Republic, we were looking at the UCMJ, we were looking at Admiralty law, we were looking at the Act of 1871. We were looking at all of these theories, right? Trying to figure out
Yeah.
which was right and which wasn't. And, there was paperwork by someone or something going to The Hague and all of this different things. So, early on, people would have this idea that, that anything that we were doing was, you know, I hate to use the word subversive, but it was really so counter to the regular narrative that people were trying to put us in the box, except the box really wouldn't fit. They'd call people sovereign citizens and they'd say all of this stuff. But the important thing to that I think for the listeners to recognize is everybody has a starting point. For me, I woke up one day and it was radical, man. I mean, I just thought everybody was the enemy and I just thought I was going to go slay the dragon, right? If you didn't think
Yeah.
like me, boy, I tell you what, it was your fault. And I kept pointing the finger, pointing the finger, pointing the finger. And I never realized there was always six pointing back at me, right? And it took me a
Yeah.
long time to be able to figure that out. And the cool thing I like about you is that we've been friends for a long time. I've followed you for a long time on social media and everything else and looking at the things that you're writing. And I'm like, this is brilliant. And the cool thing is what you've supplied here is something that I don't think has ever been done before. Would you say that that's accurate? The deal with
Yeah.
the federal land issue?
Yeah. So you're right about that. Here's how I would classify my engagement in the matter over such a long period of time. There is no repository, bibliography, there's no library where you're going to find a consolidation, like I put in the book, of all of the different elements that constitute a 235-year plus federal land history. And the reason why is because it encompasses a very broad range of political and legal actions in the past that I think preclude it from being categorized as one thing over another, right? It's a political matter, it's a legal matter, it's a constitutional matter, it's a
It,
policy matter,
it's a historical matter,
it's a
right?
historical
I
matter.
mean, you've
Yes,
managed to be able
right.
to put all of this stuff together, and the draw for me is, I mean, when you're going to be able to cover that many spheres, you've got to supply enough ample evidence to be able to be able to fit in all of those boxes, and you've done a great job doing that. And so as we go on and learn about this, I
Well,
mean,
that's why it took so long, Tom,
that was
right? That's
insane,
why it took so long. Yeah, that's why it took so long.
right? So when you look at it now, and you were going through this, so you were going through this book, and you know all of these things became sort of revelations for you as everything started to unfold. Um, what did you when you were going through this book? God, there's so much to ask. It's like, okay, so I guess where did you find, we can go right to the crux of the matter, but so what was the when you ended up getting to the point where you were comfortable with what you were doing and where you were going, what kinds of things pointed out for you? Now remember, we got a short video. What kind of things pointed out to you that you wanted people to understand about what you'd found out?
Okay, so it didn't take very long into my investigation. I'd say within about 3 to 4 years that I found that there was an exclusive jurisdiction problem.
Okay.
What that means is that the federal government, yeah, I know, it gets a little complicated. The
That's
federal
what these
government,
videos are for.
right? I found that the federal government had been utilizing exclusive jurisdiction for the federal land program since its inception. And then within about 3 or 4 years, the question arose as to whether or not they stopped using it.
So, to interject, to make sure that we bring this home, I have read the book twice. I look at exclusive jurisdiction as and the layman term that would come to me is the exercise of federal supremacy. Would you say that that's relatively true over the
Yeah,
states?
another.
Okay, good.
Yep. Well,
Okay,
there's another way to say it, not just the states, because
an easy one.
it's yeah, it's about an application of right. All right.
Okay.
So Article 1, Section 1(8)(17), Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 gives the United States government an exclusive power over Washington, D.C. What that means is that the government's right on its property, regardless of what the right is, that its right on its property
Mhm.
is greater than the state and the citizens, right? Both of those. That means that the federal government doesn't have to, it's not forced by the Constitution to allow you to have a constitutional right on its property. That's what it means.
Mhm.
It's not it's not bound by the Constitution to apply it in that manner.
Because people think if they have the Constitution, they've got these rights everywhere anywhere on the United States. So
That's right.
that's an interesting topic. And when you get into the weeds, it can be a little complicated. But I think with the explanations I think that we're planning on doing here, it should bring it home. It was definitely I was definitely brain tired when I read it for sure. So going back to the issue then, so this question was a matter of right. It was a matter of jurisdiction between, I would say, between the states and the federal government, and the entities that the federal government ended up creating.
That's right. The agencies, you mean?
Yes, well, yeah, the Northwest Ordinance and the acquisition of property and the rest of those things.
Oh yeah.
And
Okay, so
I'm probably going way too far ahead, but because I'm trying to
well,
be able to
no,
nail
no,
down.
let's
Okay, go
let's
ahead.
talk about the Northwest Ordinance for a moment because you bring it up, so let's deal with that because it's important. It's
Yep.
vitally important to the exercise. So the exercise of exclusive jurisdiction was mandatory for the creation of the United States. It was mandatory. Without it, there would have been too much interference over the federal government's land program.
By the several states.
by the states that were being created or the territories at the time,
Right.
and also the citizens who could potentially claim a constitutional right if the government's territorial actions may trample on some individual rights. So the government knew this ahead of time.
Mhm.
Before they ever drafted the Constitution, they realized, okay, look, if we're going to create this land program, we're going to create states out of this program, we can't have everybody interfering with the program.
Mhm.
So it was all done under the government's exclusive jurisdiction. So
Mhm.
nobody could.
Mhm. And you see that as being lawful.
Yeah, it was lawful because the creation of the federal government's land program
Mhm.
predates the adoption of the federal constitution by almost 2 years.
This is a really this is where it gets really interesting, man. So okay, so there's a lot of details. We know all that. We're just trying to skirt over the top and give people a 30,000 foot view. So the issues that you want people to recognize with the book is to be able to understand exactly what the
That when you're in a federal territory land, we'll just call it territory because that's what they are. When
Mhm.
it's federally owned, it's territorial. And that when you're in a territory,
Mhm.
the government may not be viewing your rights as applicable.
So what if we say something more general, like because I'm just trying to be able to appeal to the layman folks, because after
Sure.
all, I am one. So as I read the book, one of the things that's important for me is, in order for us to be Americans, we should understand our history and we should read as much as we can as jealous guardians of liberty for the future of our generations. But when I read your book, the one thing that really stuck out to me, and I'm trying to be able to go big here, and then we can get into the details later, is
Okay.
it looks to me like what happened, right or wrong, rightfully or wrongfully, regardless of the intents or whatever, that what ended up happening through this sort of mandatory exclusive jurisdiction to be able to take care of the issues, to implement this land distribution program without everybody getting involved, actually created the behemoth that we're dealing with today. Is that true?
That is true because what we found is that the government, while we would think that the government would abandon its exclusive jurisdiction in the modern times after the states were organized and went from territories to states, the actual what we find is that actually they did not.
So it's easy so we could maybe even make it easier and say, and I could misspeak here, but I would like to just basically say that if you are concerned about the behemoth administrative um state that we have, this is where it all begins,
Yeah,
right?
because the this is so like if you were to talk to somebody like Philip Hamburger or Dave Erlinson, right? If Philip Hamburger is a writer on the administrative state, his work is probably the most relevant.
Hmm.
So if anybody out there wants to verify my work or what I'm talking about here, the best way to do that is find anything written by Philip Hamburger on the administrative state, purchase it from Amazon or read it. Okay. And David Erlinson, if anybody knows him, he's a good person to talk to about this as well. He's very well steeped in it.
Okay. So, as we sort of round out where we are with this, with the things that you found, is there anything sort of pertinent that you want to mention before we start talking about what the plan is, that we, if there is one, what we wish people to gain from this and that kind of thing?
No, I think let's get into the plan because that's where there's a lot of hope that and I want to create hope because we're not sunk and we're not beaten, right? We just need to understand how to navigate this situation and it is navigatable. So let's get into that.
Okay, let's do that. So my hope, at least for me, was after reading this book is saying, "Oh my gosh, we've really just got to put this in the hands of people that can read it, and so that we can begin doing something about it. Communicating with legislators through an educational means, or, or something like that. I mean, that's the position that I have anyway. I don't beat people over the head for taking contrary positions, even though I might suffer for the unintended consequences of the decisions they make. But ultimately, we're in this because we want to be able to change the hearts and minds of people. And the best way to do that isn't beating them over the head. Would you agree?
I would agree. Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is trying to be able to put this in the hands of people and finding, um, uh, finding good, concerned Americans to be able to have them digest this information and to be able to share this information, and to be able to get it out. So when you talk about uh, when we think about solutions for what you have after reading this, what kinds of solutions are you really hoping for? Have you thought that through much? Is there anything
Yeah.
specific you think that we can gain from where you're going to be going with this as people continue to watch the series of videos?
Yeah. So, we've got a Lava Ridge project problem. We've got a national natural asset company proposal problem. We have a series of proposals by the federal government that nobody wants, right? And everybody's asking the same question: what do we do about it? All right.
Mhm.
We have mining companies that can't mine, little miners that can't mine, loggers that can't log, et cetera, et cetera. So, solutions. One of the solutions that is going to be the most poignant solution is making sure that private rights are applicable on federal land. In order to do that, we have to directly challenge the exclusive jurisdiction of the government. Okay, does that make sense?
That sounds like a tall order for some of the layman's folks. So
It will
what would
be.
that look like for the citizens like me?
Well, it's a little complicated because you got to get into private right law, and we probably shouldn't do that in any of these videos. It's just a little too complex. But
Hmm.
there are people out there that can handle private right law, right?
Hmm.
There aren't a lot of attorneys in the Western United States on land issues or water issues that want to take on a private right argument unless it's a narrowly defined private right argument. And I'll give you an example, and I should give you an example because otherwise it won't be understood. So the Institute for Justice got a hold of David Erlandson on his water rights case. And in case anybody doesn't understand the David Erlandson case, let me just explain it really quickly. David Erlandson had a federal mining claim on the South Fork of the Clearwater River, and he was dredging it. Now, now, the state required a permit, and he had purchased the permit. The federal government required a permit, but what the state had done in the water plan of 2005 is they had given all of the dredgers on that river a privilege and immunity from the 402 permit program. So David Erlandson availed himself of the state privilege and immunity, and in so doing, ran afoul of the EPA's 402 permit program. So the EPA drug him into a tribunal where they beat him, took a couple of years, and he spent $20,000 on an attorney that just abandoned the case. And that's how I got involved. He called me up and said, "Hey, my attorney abandoned the case. I'm $20,000 in. Can you help me out?" And then I took over from there. I just did all the paralegal work. I didn't give him any legal advice. You don't give this guy legal advice. He gives you legal advice. Okay. So anyway, I just did all the paralegal work for him because I'm good at drafting legal documents. So his defense has been that he had a right to dredge on the river without the 402 permit that the EPA was requiring of him to get because the state had given him a privilege and immunity. All right. So that we made that a private right argument to the Ninth Circuit. And hopefully it gets to the Supreme Court where he can make that argument to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will sustain it. We brought up the Ninth Amendment right, and it gets a little complicated from there. But let's just say that we understand how to make the private right arguments and make them in the right way. Okay, so
So
there. the point of this is that I want to bring in the Institute of Justice. So the Institute of Justice got a hold of Dave Earl and said they had been tracking the case, and the conversation that the lead attorney had with Dave Erlinson was that they wanted to take his case on a Seventh Amendment issue to the Ninth Circuit, and that they were fairly positive that they could win the case on a Seventh Amendment issue.
Wow.
To which the lead attorney says, well, what do you mean? And all Dave Erlinson had to say is, name me one administrative case in the last 60 years where the value in controversy does not exceed $20.
So when you get into
so the response that Dave Erlinson got was, I'll get back to you. 2 weeks later, he got back to him and said, yeah, we're not going to take the case. So
if we had to break this down into simple terms, you have a guy that followed the state law, got permits to be able to do the thing that he was supposed to do. You have a federal agency that that was supposed to be able to operate, I'm assuming, under the appearance of what they called concurrent jurisdiction, right? Where
yes,
he's
right.
in the state, but he's under the, the DEQ. What did you say it was? The that agency you're talking about,
So
EPA.
his permit was through the IDEQ.
Okay.
And he had a legal permit that way, but he was supposed to, the EPA said he was supposed to purchase their federal 402 NPDES permit.
Even though the state didn't require it because of the Act of 2015. So I think what we could summarize from this is there's a lot of confusion here that people are going to see, and they're going to recognize the importance, hopefully, from the example that we gave, where there's I shouldn't even say a struggle, actually, because the states aren't struggling to be able to beat the feds back. The states are operating as I love your term, the vassal state arrangement, which actually puts them in an inferior position to the federal government, which anybody that's you or like you or myself or some of these concerned people that are watching should be very concerned about. The other problem is not only this exclusive jurisdiction that the federal government is operating in, but they're empowering, or they've managed to empower, these administrative agencies to be able to not only take them into administrative courts, which is a topic for a different time because you get into Article 1 and Article 3, and I love that. But it's important for us to be able to understand here, once again, a lot of people are saying, oh, I even say it, federal government's out of control, federal government's out of control, federal government's out of control. But
how are they out of control? That's the point.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And the other thing that we're seeing, though, is you could argue whether the federal government is out of control or not. But what we also fail to recognize and say openly is the administrative state that's been given these powers are operating more than rogue. And we have to get beyond this patriot rhetoric, right? This is not a political, I don't think it's a partisan issue necessarily, as far as if people understood the truth, if they would really have a problem with it. And I guess what I mean is it's not like a republic. Well, never mind. I can't even say that because everything's political anymore. But the whole point of the matter is that what we're dealing with is an absolute assault on private property by the federal government that has empowered these administrative agencies, and it's left to the states to be able to curb that. As far as your action, I did want to mention one thing. Although dealing with private rights and finding attorneys and stuff and relying on you and your expertise and all that, which is great, be prepared to be busy, is something that we can do. And the one thing that I've done as being somebody that's been in civic engagement for a long time, because the people are going to kind of deduce from what they hear from the videos, like, well, if all we need is a rights attorney, then all we need to do is throw money at somebody. Here's what I've vowed to do, and you guys can decide whether this is what you feel like you want to do or not. I decided that I was done. Ron told me about this book years ago, and I have to admit, I waited to read it. Okay. But I decided that I was going to read it. And I decided that I wanted to understand it. Okay. And these are all notations I just made the first run around. The notes that I have actually were from the second time around. Um, that was designed to be able to help people understand this. So what I'm getting at here is that it's very, very important, as one of the most important action steps that you can take for yourself is to read the book, read the information, come back and, communicate with Ron or communicate with me and all of that. Watch the video series that we have. Go to Ron's website. I guess the first step would be, I'm going to do this really easy. We're going to do this easy. Step one, go to Ron's website. Ron, what's your website? The history of
Uh, I don't have that with me right now. It's
Okay, well, I'm going to put the link to the video if I can in
yeah, let's
Rumble.
do that.
If I can do that in Rumble, I'm going to do that. I think it's called The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. Anyway, I'll post that in there, and you can always reach out to one of us too, if you're interested in that. That's the first thing. The next thing is read it like you do your Bible, or maybe you can read it like I did on Thanksgiving, where I just read. Man, I just sat in that chair for so long, I'm sore. But anyway, and try to be able to understand the subject matter. And when you struggle with it, come back to review these videos that we're doing, because we plan on doing timelines. You can scroll to a particular issue, particular section, maybe a particular page in a particular chapter, hopefully, and you can follow along with us. And then when you start seeing the light, and even though you don't, share it with other people and help people share this video and help people understand, if we are really, really concerned about this country and you really want to get down to the root cause of the problem of where the of how we got here, this is one of the greatest books I've ever read to be able to help you understand that. Now it is complicated. It's not designed for an elementary school person to read. But since I'm in elementary school and I keep reading, eventually it just kind of soaks in. So if I can do it, you can do it, and it's important that you do. The second thing to do is to be able to find people that are genuinely interested in understanding the problems with our country. That's the second one. A lot of people complain. They ask, "Oh, no, I'm really worried about my country," and then they say there's no hope and there's nothing we can do and all of that, and they operate within their defeatist attitude, which should be nowhere near who we are and what we do. Um, and then start communicating with your legislators and just ask basic questions about what you learn. And see, and the other thing you can do is, like, I think what we did, Ron, sorry to take over this, but I think in just the last couple of weeks we've been sharing a few things through email about some of the things that we're starting to see that really need to be addressed. Things like the natural asset companies. I think that would be a worthwhile side video that we should be doing, talking about this from a multitude of perspectives so that people have a basic understanding of how all of this stuff comes together. There were a variety of I think Raul Labrador's got some email coming out about what he's been fighting. There's been some other emails where we've interestingly found out what was going on and in the legislature with bills and some of these other things. And I think it might even be worthwhile for us to be able to do side shoots of some of these topics to be able to help people understand what how this book applies to almost everything that we're dealing with today. Right?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that you and I have been talking about. As the federal government ramps up certain programs that it passes through the legislature or doesn't, like the NACs are not legislation, right? It's a SEC rule. It's a proposed SEC rule.
Mhm.
So they're just bypassing legislation. Why? Because they know they can't get it done. So they're using their exclusive jurisdiction power to implement this through the SEC, and the SEC has absolutely zero authority to make rules for federal lands. So now we got a problem, right? It's so out of control that you have the SEC making rules for federal land. That's how out of control it is. And if we
And
don't do
SEC,
something,
yes, and the SEC is an administrative agency, correct?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So here we have another instance of an administrative agency. The other thing that was mentioned, I think it was you mentioned it the other day, was in our state constitution. For those of you that live in Idaho, there might be something like that in your state constitution as well. But Article 3, Section 29,
Yeah.
Are you
Yep.
familiar with that? Where it
Yeah.
talks
So
where it talks
go
about
ahead.
the fact that and I'm gonna mess it up, but basically what I've come to believe, and Ron's helped me believe, is that not all administrative rules are bad, right?
Right.
But in order for them to be good, not good, but lawfully applied, they need to be able to have a sort of statutory, what's the word used? Permission, statutory
Underlying
authorization.
legislative authority.
Right. And if it doesn't have that, then the rule is it shouldn't even it should be null, right?
Null and void.
Yeah. So and your book will help us understand what that is. But I think as another thing for somebody to do, they could not only read their state constitution, but uh, review Article 3, Section 29, and as you consider the administrative state, the rules, and all of the agencies, consider what that particular part of the Constitution means to you. So
Well,
anyway,
section, do you want me to answer that or will you
no,
ask
go
me
ahead.
that
You can,
question?
sure.
Well,
We're almost up. We should probably keep it kind of short.
yeah, okay. So section 29 is the answer, the legislative answer oversight of the administrative rules. Now, in the state of Idaho, it's a little bit different the way the administrative state works because the executive branch creates the agencies and the legislature has oversight over the rules. So every year or every couple years or whatever, the new rules are promulgated for the agencies. They put them in a book format. They submit them to the legislature. The legislature goes through those rules, determines, and they're supposed to under Section 29. Their job is to do this. Their job is to read the rule and make sure that that rule links back legitimately to the underlying legislation that created the rule or that the agency says creates the authority for the rule. um this the legislature gets so inundated with these rule proposals that it's dubious as to whether or not when they do look into each one of these to make sure they link them back to legislation that there's a clear thread, or then again it's a matter of interpretation. And we know that the legislature, the Idaho legislature, engages in something called statutory vagueness. So a lot of these rules that I've looked at, they're underpinned by a statutory provision that's extremely vague in its application, and they're making a rule that can kind of go either way as far as interpretation. So what the legislature's job is supposed to be under Section 29 is to link all those rules back to that legislation and then make a decision as to whether or not that rule was intended to be there or not.
Right. And the legislature has been trained for at least as long as I've been active to be able to either accept them all or deny them all. Um, and that's where I think our governor said he's the least red tape and whatever. And according to some of our legislators, they said that he basically just moved certain provisions from some area to make it look like they were gone, and he just moved them in a different area. So
Well,
anyway,
there's these shenanigans that are going on, and we need to isolate these shenanigans. And look,
mhm,
we know that there's been some things that have been created in the state of Idaho
right.
that that rules authorized to happen, and then when you go back to the legislation, it's like, no, it didn't authorize. Okay, so the only way to stop that, really, well, the best way to stop, the only way, but the best way to stop that is the legislature doing its oversight power in Section 29.
Yeah. Amen. So as we finish up, man, why should people buy your book? And put you on the spot.
Uh, because it'll tell you how to look at the federal land issue from the historical lens and from the lens of the Supreme Court in the proper way.
I see. And I would like to add that the reason why you should read the book is because our country needs you to read the book, number one. Number two, nobody else has written anything about it. And number three, if you're concerned, did I do that right? One, two, three. And finally, if you guys are concerned about the behemoth of this administrative state that we created, nothing is better than trying to be able to break it down than to be able to understand its origins. And so I would encourage you guys to get a copy of the book. The link will be down in the comment section. I think if Rumble has one, it's called The History of the United States, History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. And I think the book it's a available digital copy. I think it's 35 or $41. and it'll cost, if you want to print it, it'll cost you about 35 bucks at Staples, like it did for me. I will tell you that for those of you that may not be well funded, it is an investment worth your money. So I'm hoping that that all of you would do that and review it, and hopefully even consider having working groups in your area to bring a greater awareness of what's going on. So Ron, I thank you for your time today. I look forward to spending a lot of time with you as we go through chapter and verse of the book. Um, and I won't even make you wear a robe or a collar.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that, buddy.
All right, buddy. So I guess until next time, this has been the introduction of federal lands, the history of federal lands, and the violence of faction by Ron Nielsen, my buddy. And man, you're amazing. You just continue to amaze me, and you should be amazing a lot more people too. So keep it up, my friend. Stay healthy. We need you.
Thanks, Tom.
See you later.
Bye bye.